recidivism. Remember recidivism, that a person is considered to be a recidivist if he commits the felony the second time around, or he committed a felony under the same title of the RPC the second time around, right? So, very simple question, and yet it would help you, lead you to something significant. So you have there, last would be quasi-offenses or quasi-offenses. So these are, we are specifically referring to reckless imprudence. So Title 1, Crimes Against National Security and the Law of Nations. You have there Section 1, which is treason and espionage. You have there the provision of the law. And this is the first paragraph. Now, to guide you more on how to dissect a particular article so that you can master the felony, please be guided with the 5 WH questions and the 1H, right? So what are they? What, when, where, why, who, how? So example, you have there Article 114, treason. Any Filipino citizen who levies war against the Philippines or adheres to her enemies, giving them aid or comfort within the Philippines or elsewhere, shall be punished by reclusion perpetua to death and shall pay a fine not to exceed 4 million pesos. Now, let's use the 5 WH and 1H question. Who can be made liable for treason? You have there the answer. When shall he be liable? Where did he commit the crime? Why is he liable? So basically, you are asking the overt acts constituting the felony. Why is he liable? It could be that your answer to this question would be repeatedly be given or intertwined to each other. But basically, that is your way of mastering the law. So when can a Filipino citizen be made liable for treason? Basically, it asked for the overt act constituting treason. Number 1, levying war. Second, adheres to their enemies, giving them aid or comfort. Where can he be made liable? Would a Filipino citizen be liable only if he is in the Philippines? Would our criminal laws does not apply if he is outside? Remember on the characteristics of criminal law, you have their generality, territoriality. You might be saying that a Filipino citizen, if he is outside the country, would not be liable because of the territoriality principle of criminal law. But take note, the law says within the Philippines or elsewhere. So meaning to say, this would mean an exception to the territoriality principle of criminal law. Because a Filipino citizen who levies war or adheres to the enemies of the Republic, even if he is outside the Philippines, can be made liable. And then you have there the penalty. Who else? Is it exclusive to the Filipino citizen? You have there the next paragraphs of Article 114. I will proceed first on the 3rd paragraph. Likewise, an alien. In other words, it is not exclusive to the Filipinos. Advancing that principle of general characteristic, the alien residing in the Philippines who commits acts of treason. What are the acts of treason? The same as that enumerated under the 1st paragraph, levying war and adhering to the enemies, shall also be punished for treason. Okay, so who can be made liable? Filipino citizen and resident alien. alien, as far as alien is concerned, for purposes of the crime of treason, he can only be made liable if he is residing in the Philippines at the time of the commission of the offense. Let's go back to the second paragraph. This is how you prove treason. So how do you prove treason? Or how can you make a person charged of treason criminally liable? No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses, at least to the same overt act, or on confession of the accused in open court. So, in other words, there are two ways of proving treason. One, testimony of two witnesses, at least to the same overt act. Remember, in the commission of treason, you have there adhering to the enemies, giving them aid or comfort. The aid or comfort there is the overt act referred to here in the ways of committing treason. If the act of the accused falls under the second way of committing treason, that is adhering to the enemies, you need witnesses of at least two persons testifying against the accused over the same overt act. The same overt act. Confession, what do we mean by confession? This is the pleading of guilty, plea of guilt on the part of the accused in open court. The open court, the court who has acquired jurisdiction over the case against the accused. Okay, so let's reiterate the elements, though we already discussed it, and then we examine again the elements. Syaro, dili hinumduman, di ba? Okay. The offender is a Filipino citizen or an alien residing in the Philippines. It would be easier for us to recall because when we read the provision of the law itself, we had it in such a way of answering the 5 WH questions and 1H. Easy recall. That there is war in which the Philippines is involved. In other words, this is a war crime. The Philippines is involved. The offender is either levies war against the government or adheres to the enemies, giving them aid or comfort. Filipino citizen, liable wherever he may be, as far as alien is residing, only if he resides in the Philippines. Now, you might be asking, why is it that the alien is only liable if he is residing? Because as far as treason is concerned, it deals more on the allegiance of a person. Remember, the Philippines is at war, so it calls for the loyalty of the person. What are the ways or mode of committing treason? There are only two ways or two modes of committing treason. Levying war against the government, and it may include concurrence of two things. Actual assembling of men. You gather a group of men in order or for the purpose of executing a treasonable design by force. How about adhering to the enemies, giving them aid or comfort? As far as adherence to the enemy, it literally means intent to betray. There is adherence to the enemy when a citizen intellectually or emotionally favors the enemy and harbors sympathies or convictions disloyal to his country's policy or interests. So basically, we are really dealing with traitors. If you are a Filipino, you have to be loyal to your country wherever you may be. Aid or comfort means an act which strengthens or tends to strengthen the enemy in the conduct of war against the traitor's country, and an act which weakens or tends to weaken the power of the traitor's country or resist or to attack the enemy. So in the giving aid or comfort, the consequence would either be to strengthen the enemy or weaken the forces of your own country. By your act, it may weaken the defense of the country by, let's say, you get the firearms of the Philippine soldiers and then you give it to the enemy, or you even just keep it. So in other words, if they will be invaded by the enemies, how could they protect our country when you stole already the guns of the Filipino soldiers? So it weakens our defense. Adhere to the enemy by giving them aid. It could be possible that you give them food to give them more strength to attack our forces. So those are examples. I had here an enumeration of specific acts of aid or comfort based on decided cases. Serving as informer and active member of the Japanese military police to the detriment of your own country because you help them pursue the guerrilla suspects. Who are the guerrillas? So these are the Filipinos, our own Filipinos who revolted against the Japanese during that time. Guerrilla because they are part of the underground movement. So if you knew very well your history, you can imagine how our fellow Filipinos were living at the time during the Japanese invasion. Serving in the Japanese army as agent or spy, and participating in the raid of guerrilla hideout. Acting as finger woman. What do we mean by finger woman? So the way for me to recall finger woman is on that particular movie, an old movie, and then you consider in that you have there a fellow Filipino, ilan ang tabunan, og mura og bayong, butangan lang og mata, and then he will be asked to point. And then the person who will be pointed by that finger woman, the finger woman would either be a man or woman, then he will be killed by the Japanese soldiers. So that is acting as finger woman. Taking active part in the mass killing of civilians by the Japanese soldiers by personally tying the hands of the victim. So in other words, yeah, you have there the makapili. So in other words, you adhere to the atrocities done by these invaders against your country. And then, so you have there being a makapili. Being a makapili, this is a group of Filipinos who formed their an association at that, and then serving at the whims of the Japanese occupation. So those are, again, modes of committing treason: levying war, adhering to the enemies, giving them aid or comfort. How to prove treason? Remember, you have there the two-witness rule. What do we mean by this two-witness rule? Testimony of two witnesses is required to prove the overt act of giving aid or comfort. It is not necessary to prove adherence. So remember, you have their levying war. Testimony of one is sufficient. Adherence to the enemy may be testified to by one person, but as to the specific act, which is part of adherence, it has to be testified by at least 2 witnesses. An overt act is defined as that physical activity that constitutes the rendering of aid and comfort. Adherence may be proved by one witness from the nature of the act itself or from the circumstances surrounding the act. So any question on 114? So basically, what are you going to remember? There is, of course, the elements. And then who can be made liable? What are the ways of proving treason? What are the ways of committing treason? 115. Conspiracy and proposal to commit treason. You are already familiar with conspiracy to commit a crime. You are also familiar with proposal to commit a crime. While in your crime 1, you were taught that mere conspiracy is not punishable because it is still all in the mind. But as an exception, you have there 115, that mere conspiracy is already punishable because there is a law that defines and punishes that mere conspiracy. And that conspiracy is referring to conspiracy to commit treason, as well as proposal to commit treason, 115. You have there the penalty. So how is conspiracy to commit treason committed? When in time of war, 2 or more persons come to an agreement to levy war against the government and to adhere to the enemies and to give them aid or comfort, and take note on conspiracy and decide to commit it. While proposal to commit treason is committed when in time of war, a person has decided to levy war against the government or to adhere to the enemies giving them aid or comfort, proposes its execution to some other person or persons. Now, how about if treason is actually committed thereafter, or subsequently treason took place? What would happen to the initial conspiracy? What would happen to the proposal? They shall be absorbed. They shall be treated as a manner of incurring criminal liability. Remember in your crime 1, you were asked to distinguish what is conspiracy to commit a crime and when shall it be considered as a manner of incurring criminal liability. As a crime itself, the mere conspiracy or the mere proposal. But if treason is actually committed thereafter, the initial conspiracy shall not be considered as an independent or separate felony. It shall be absorbed in the felony of treason. The conspiracy there shall now become a manner of incurring criminal liability. To illustrate, it could be possible that you are not there on the ground actually assembling men, or you adhere to the enemy giving aid or comfort, but you are the person who is part of the conspiracy and you provided for the logistical support to those persons who actually did treason. So, since treason was actually committed thereafter, then you are also be made liable for treason because you conspire with others who actually committed treason. So the conspiracy becomes a manner of incurring criminal liability. Same with proposal. 116. What do we mean by misprision of treason? Every person owing allegiance to the government of the Philippines without being a foreigner and having knowledge of any conspiracy against them conceals or does not disclose and make known the same as soon as possible to the governor or fiscal of the province or the mayor or fiscal of the city in which he resides, as the case may be, shall be punished as an accessory to the crime of treason. So who can be made liable for misprision of prison? Only Filipino citizens. Okay, only Filipino citizens. Why? Because the law says without being a foreigner. In other words, a foreigner cannot be made liable for misprision of treason even if he is a resident. Okay, only Filipino citizen. When can a Filipino citizen be made liable for misprision of treason? If he comes to know or he know that conspiracy is being planned by others to the commission of treason. And despite such knowledge, you conceals or you did not disclose the same. Okay, you failed to disclose the same. So meaning to say, misprision of treason is an act by omission. You fail to disclose, you conceals such act of conspiracy to commit treason. To whom you are required to disclose? Governor or fiscal of the province. So at present, fiscal of the province, we are referring to the provincial prosecutor. So governor and provincial prosecutor. How about the mayor or the fiscal of the city? So the city mayor and the city prosecutor. So those are the present positions. What would be your liability? Punished as an accessory to the crime of treason. So, since you are punished as an accessory, so your penalty is 2 degrees lower as provided under Article 114 that defines and punishes treason. So what are the elements of misprision of treason? That the offender must be owing allegiance to the government and not a foreigner. So referring only to Filipino citizen. I think I missed something. But you have there in the Book of Reyes on the definition of allegiance. So as far as allegiance is concerned, Filipinos owe permanent allegiance to the country, wherever he may be. As far as the foreigner, resident alien is concerned, he owes temporary allegiance to the Philippine government while he is here in the Philippines because he would still be protected by the government. So temporary only because he owes permanent allegiance to his country of origin, to which he is a national. So for purposes of punishing treason, whether you owe permanent or a temporary allegiance, it does not matter. So those are the elements for misprision of treason. So to reiterate, as your clue to 116 can be committed only by Filipinos. Conspiracy is one to commit treason. Okay, the crime that we are talking about is conspiracy to commit treason. Does not apply when the crime of treason is already committed by someone, because the government already know that treason is actually happening. What is being punished is conspiracy, meaning to say an evil plan to the commission of treason. To the commission has to happen or eventually will happen. But if treason is already committed, then 116 does not apply anymore, even if you will not report. Because the government, Philippine government is already warned that treason is happening. Punish as an accessory, so that is 2 degrees lower. But he is charged as principal under Article 116. So since he is charged under as principal in 116, though his penalty is 2 degrees lower, Article 20 does not apply to him. On the exceptions, on certain accessory, if he is, let's say, a blood relative of the principal. Okay, so Article 20 does not apply. Espionage 117. In espionage, there are only few as listed in the RPC, but you also have their Commonwealth Act 616. Article 117 provides that the penalty of prison correctional shall be inflicted upon any person who, without authority, enters a warship, fort, or naval or military establishment or reservation. What is the purpose of your illegal entrance? To obtain any information, plans, photographs, or other data of a confidential nature relative to the defense of the Philippine archipelago. That is one way of committing espionage. You know what a warship is? Kanang atong mga BRP. Okay, barko ng Republika ng Pilipinas. Gregorio del Pilar, something that's BRP, so that's a warship. Fort, what fort? Fort San Pedro? No, it's not the fort before, but now it's not it's more on historical purpose anymore. So we are referring to, let's say, Fort Caringal, just like the Campo Crame. So these are the forts that we are referring to in 117. Naval or military establishment or reservation. So to where used by our men in uniform for purposes of the defense of our country. Second, being in possession by reason of the public office he holds, articles, data, or information referred to in the preceding paragraph. So meaning to say, you are in possession of this confidential data, data that involves national security. And you are liable for espionage if you discloses their contents to a representative of a foreign nation. Because it is confidential, it has to do with our national security. And then the penalty next higher in degree shall be imposed if the offender be a public officer or employee. So meaning to say, this can be committed by anyone. Okay? Espionage can be committed by anyone, only that if you are a public officer or employee, the crime is qualified, the maximum penalty shall be imposed upon you. Espionage is the offense of gathering, transmitting, or losing information respecting the national defense with the intent or reason to believe that the information is to be used to the injury of the Republic of the Philippines or to the advantage of any foreign nation. By this definition, to distinguish espionage from treason, treason is a war crime, while espionage can be committed during in times of peace and time of war. Anytime. So let's have the elements of espionage. By entering without authority, therefore, a warship, fort, or naval or military establishment or reservation to obtain any information, plans, photographs, or other data of a confidential nature relative to the defense of the Philippines. Now, by the way, you might be asking that the 5WH and 1H question is applicable only to treason. No. You have to do it in all of the felony. Wala na lang nako gibalik-balik. As far as our lecture is concerned, kamo na bahala na ha. I'll just give you the guide. So when shall he be made liable for espionage? You have there the first element. So the offender enters any of the places mentioned, any of these, warship, fort, or naval, or military establishment, or reservation. You have no authority. Purpose is to obtain information, plans, photographs, or other data of a confidential nature relative to the defense of the Philippines. Now, I'm not saying you can be made liable for espionage, but maybe some of you have experienced, if you are in these places, picture taking is not allowed. Okay, picture taking is not allowed because sometimes while you do not have that kind of intent to compromise our national security, pero out of curiosity, for the sake of posting something on Facebook, manghambog magud ta, di ba? Ipakita dayon. So, would that pictures be, let's say, put the national defense into compromise? The answer would be yes. Possibility is if we have really let's say, our enemies, and you have there a picture of the military reservation, they will be able to know the physical layout of that particular military reservation. And you will put them at risk. For example, naa-ay din hay mga high-profile arrested person in that particular facility. So, those who have evil motive will have the authority asa sila muagi because of the physical layout, gaining idea on what the physical layout of this particular facility because of the picture that you posted in Facebook. So that is only an example. So that is how the possibility of having it the national defense be compromised by your negligence. We just call it as negligence. Second element rather. By disclosing to the representative of a foreign nation the contents of the articles, data, or information. So if you notice, there is this foreign element here in espionage. Same with treason. There is that foreign element. I say this because later on, when we will be discussing about rebellion, it is exclusively local. So if there is that foreign counterpart, foreign element, Title 1, okay? The offender is a public officer that he has in his possession the articles, data, or information referred to in paragraph 1, and he discloses their contents to a representative of a foreign nation. So if you notice, we have here one act, and then we enumerated the elements. Second act, we enumerated the elements for easier understanding of the act committing espionage. I remember at the height of the election, prior to the last election, they accused a former senator of espionage, being a traitor. It was no, not espionage, but treason. So, is there basis? No. One element is that the Philippines is not at war. So you cannot make him liable for treason. Next, the offender must have the intention to obtain information relative to the defense of the Philippines. And then it is not necessary that information is actually obtained, for as long as your illegal entry therein, it was done with that purpose. So, actual getting of information, not necessary. So, if you notice, there are only two ways of committing treason under the RPC. But I've mentioned earlier, you have their Commonwealth Act 616, which is provided in the Book of Reyes. So I leave that to you for reading to expound your understanding on espionage. Let's distinguish espionage from treason, so that if you will be asked what crime is committed by the accused, you can identify the particular felony to which you can charge the accused. As far as espionage is concerned, citizenship of the offender is not an element, similar to that of treason. However, espionage can be committed both in time of peace and in time of war, and in many ways, because we can include Commonwealth Act 616. While in treason, only committed in time of war, and the same is committed in two ways only. So you know already what are the ways of committing espionage and treason. That ends chapter 1. So let's proceed with section 2. Inciting to war or giving motives for reprisals. The penalty of reclusion temporal shall be imposed upon any public officer or employee, and that of prison mayor upon any private individual who, by unlawful or unauthorized acts, provokes or gives occasion for a war involving or liable to involve the Philippine Islands, or exposes Filipino citizens to reprisals on their persons or property. When can one be made liable under 118? So let's examine the elements of the crime. That the offender performs unlawful act or unauthorized acts. Now, by the way, who is this offender? Any person. If you are a public officer, your penalty is just higher if you are a private individual. So it can be committed by anyone. You perform an unlawful or authorized act, and that act of yours provokes or give occasion for a war involving or liable to involve the Philippines, or exposes Filipino citizens to reprisals on their persons or property. Now, I remember during that time that the issue of floor contemplation, many Filipino citizens were actually exposed to reprisals by the other citizens of that particular country. That is a typical example of putting the other Filipinos or expose the other Filipino to reprisal on their person or property. Only that you cannot charge her under this particular provision, because as far as we are concerned, she did not perform any unlawful or unauthorized act. While she killed someone, remember, we have there the justifying circumstances. One of them is self-defense. And what have you learned in justifying circumstances? If your act falls under any of the circumstances in Article 11, it is as if you are not committing a crime. I hope you remember that. And since you are not committing a crime, you are also not civilly liable. That is under Article 11. So while the act of the person may have exposed the other Filipinos to reprisal, the first element is wanting. Hence, you cannot make her liable. So meaning to say, all these two elements must concur to make the person liable under this particular provision. Remember that intention of the offender is immaterial for as long as you committed an unlawful act, and because of that unlawful act, it gives the occasion to compromise the Philippines or to expose its citizens to reprisals on their persons or property. Committed in time of peace, but because of your act, it gives the occasion that it endangers the security of the Philippines. So, committed by anyone, only that if you are a public officer, the penalty is higher, qualified. 119. When shall there be a felony on violation of neutrality? When can one be made liable? The penalty of prisión correccional shall be inflicted upon anyone who, on the occasion of a war in which the government is not involved, violates any regulation issued by competent authority for the purpose of enforcing neutrality. So by the provision alone, you can decipher when can one be made liable only under 119. The Philippines is not involved in a war. There is a war, but the Philippines is not involved. The Philippine government issued a regulation to enforce neutrality, meaning to say we are prohibited from joining or participating or making any move that would escalate the war to which we are not involved, and the offender violates such regulation. Neutrality is defined as when a nation or power which takes no part in a contest or arms going on between others is referred to as neutral. Na ay nag-away, wa tay labot. The government issued a regulation to enforce neutrality, but you violate such regulation. In other words, if there is no regulation issued to enforce neutrality, then there is no violation. The overt act committed under this particular provision of the law is your violation of the regulation issued to enforce neutrality. Do you hear someone at my background?
No po. No, attorney.
Please mute yourselves. Okay, so that is violation of neutrality. Correspondence with hostile country. When shall there be correspondence? Correspondence, let's go back to the traditional one. Sending of letters, sending of any communication. And this is committed only in times of war. Any person who in time of war shall have correspondence with an enemy country or territory occupied by enemy troops shall be punished by prison correctional if the correspondence has been prohibited by the government, by prison mayor if such correspondence be carried on in ciphers or conventional signs, and reclusion temporal if notice or information be given thereby which might be useful to the enemy if the offender intended to aid the enemy by giving such notice or information, he shall suffer the penalty of reclusion temporal to death. Now, if you notice in Article 120, you can see there 3 ways of committing. 3 ways, yeah. 3 ways or acts punished under the law. Correspondence with an enemy country, let us say that the Philippines is at war with Indonesia. And you send, and during those period, you send a letter to your friend in Indonesia. The war is just between the government. Mura ba og indifferent kay ka? You may say, I do not subscribe to what my government did to Indonesia. So, you write a letter to your friend in Indonesia. Would you be punished? The answer is yes, if you did it on ciphers or conventional sign. What is that conventional sign other than the usual? Maybe you have there some symbols, not the Hindu-Arabic or the Roman something. So those are ciphers or conventional sign. If it is done in the normal way, in the alphabet, it can only be made punishable if the same is prohibited by the government. There must be that prohibition to do it. So first act, correspondence is prohibited if there is that regulation issued by the government. In the second act, if you carried it on in ciphers or conventional sign, you are liable even if there is no regulation, for as long as you did it in ciphers. Okay, so that's the distinction between the two. Now, as far as paragraph 3 is concerned, if that communication is intended to be useful to the enemy, so kaning duha, pwede siya friendly ra, di ba? 1 and 2, it could be a friendly correspondence. Intent is necessary, or the usefulness of the correspondence is unnecessary. But in number 3, it's more on qualifying the act mentioned in paragraphs 1 and 2. If that correspondence might be useful, reclusion temporal, might be useful, ha? But if it is really intended to help the enemy, meaning to say useful na gyud siya, the penalty is reclusion temporal to death, the same as that of treason, because this act here is actually the overt act, adhering to the enemies, giving them aid or comfort. Similar, that's why the penalty is similar to that of treason, reclusion temporal to death. So for the qualifying circumstance to apply, the following must concur, meaning to say must be present together. Notice or information might be useful to the enemy, that the offender intended to aid the enemy. So I have there the caveat that I stated earlier. Flight to enemy country, Article 121. When can one be made liable to flight to enemy country? It's past 9 o'clock, but since okay, we can have a break after Article 121. Flight to enemy country. When can one be made liable to flight to enemy country? The penalty of aristo mayor shall be inflicted upon any person who, owing allegiance to the government, attempts to flee or to go to an enemy country when prohibited by competent authority. Now, take note that the penalty is the same if you just attempted to go to the enemy country or you went to the enemy country. Penalty is the same as that of aristo mayor. But you can only be made liable to flight to enemy country if there is that prohibition by the government, Philippine government. Now, the elements are as follows. There is war in which the Philippines is involved. Okay, we are involved. The Philippines is involved. That the offender must be owing allegiance to the government. Meaning to say, it can be committed by anyone, by a Filipino citizen or a resident alien, because the second element says offender must be owing allegiance to the government. Remember, resident alien owing temporary allegiance to the country while here in the Philippines. That the offender attempts to flee or go to the enemy country. Now, the country that is being referred to in this particular element is the country to where the Philippines is at war. To compare it to correspondence, it includes not only the territory of our enemy, but also the territory, for example, the example I had is we are war with Indonesia. If there is that country under Indonesia, because it was also invaded with Indonesia, then the prohibition applies to that particular country, which is a territory of the enemy country. Going to the enemy country is prohibited by the competent authority. Okay, so again, mere attempt to flee or to go to the enemy country consummates the crime. Okay, so can we have a 10-minute health break? Come back at 9:15.
Okay, Judge, thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Judge.
Okay, let's proceed. Section 3. Piracy in general and mutiny on the high seas. The penalty of reclusion perpetua shall be inflicted upon any person who on the high seas or Philippine waters shall attack or seize a vessel, not being a member of the complement nor a passenger, shall seize the whole or part of the cargo or vessel, its equipment, or personal belongings of its complement or passengers. Now, take note that this provision is taken from PD 532 as well, incorporated in the RPC. Now, what was the purpose or what's the difference on the amendment? Because prior to 532, piracy is limited on the high seas only. It also did not punish if done committed within Philippine waters. But to compare it to 532, it is limited to Philippine waters. So in 122, it punishes both if committed on the high seas or Philippine waters. So to distinguish high seas from Philippine waters is referring to our Philippine territory as provided under the Constitution. So those enumerated therein in the Philippine territory, all those waters mentioned therein, part of our territorial sea, so that is referred to as Philippine waters. High seas are those outside the Philippine territory, but outside of the Philippine territory, for that matter. So when shall the accused be made liable under Article 122? For purposes of piracy, the offender here is not a member of the complement to the vessel which was seized or attacked, nor a passenger of the vessel which was seized or attacked. Meaning to say, the pirate here must be a stranger to the vessel. Whereas in mutiny, to which the law prescribes the same penalty, he is a member or passenger to that vessel. He is not a stranger to the vessel. Okay, so that is one way of distinguishing the pirate from the mutiner. There are two ways of committing piracy: attacking or seizing a vessel on the high seas or Philippine waters. That is one way. The vessel as a whole. Second act is seizing the vessel while on the high seas or in Philippine waters, the whole or part of its cargo. Cargo only. Cargo or equipment of the vessel, including personal belongings of the complement or passengers of said vessel. That is still considered to be piracy. Again, who is the offender? He is a stranger, not a member of the complement or passenger of the vessel. So what are the elements under that particular way of committing piracy? That the vessel is on the high seas or in Philippine waters, the offenders are not members of its complement or passenger of the vessel, and then the act constituting piracy, either attack or seize the vessel, one act, or seize the whole or part of the cargo of said vessel, its equipment, or personal belongings of its complement or passengers. So any of this act, coupled with the fact that he is a stranger while the vessel is on the high seas or Philippine waters, he shall be made liable for piracy. He is a pirate. Piracy is the robbery or forcible depredation on the high seas without lawful authority and done with animo furande and in the spirit and intention of universal hostility. Now take note that piracy is a crime against the law of nations. It admits no territorial limits, meaning to say, even if it is committed outside the Philippine territory, Philippine laws applies. Mutiny, on the other hand, is the unlawful resistance to a superior officer, meaning to say, member of the complement resisted the superior officer or usurp the authority, or there is insubordination on the part of this lower officer, or the raising of commotions and disturbances on board a ship against the authority of its commander. So that is mutiny, and you are called the mutiner. To distinguish the two, the person who attack or seize the cargo are stranger with intent to gain in piracy. While in mutiny, the members, they are members of the crew or passenger. They just intend to ignore the ship's officer, or they may be prompted by the desire to commit plunder. So in other words, as to where the same is committed, the same, high seas or in Philippine waters. When shall piracy and mutiny considered to be an act of terrorism? If the person commits piracy or mutiny, coupled with this following colatilia, that it sow or create a condition of widespread and extraordinary fear and panic among the populace, in order to coerce the government to give in to an unlawful demand, shall be guilty of the crime of terrorism and shall suffer the penalty of 40 years of imprisonment without the benefit of parole. In other words, the act of piracy or terrorism was used as a means to create an extraordinary damage or widespread fear among the populace. So the person can be branded as a terrorist. When shall piracy be qualified? The penalty shall be reclusion perpetua to death if the crime referred to in the preceding paragraph is attended by any of the following circumstances. Whenever they have seized a vessel by boarding or firing upon the same. Okay, there is boarding of the vessel or firing of the vessel, qualified. Whenever the pirates have abandoned their victims without means of saving themselves. So there is abandonment. Whenever the crime is accompanied by murder, homicide, physical injuries, or rape. Now there is this observation by the author. Paragraph 2 of Article 123 mentions pirates. Let's go back. Whenever the pirates, so it specifically mentioned pirates. It mentions pirates, thereby excluding mutiners from said paragraph. It would seem, however, that it should be in paragraph 1 where the word pirate should be specifically mentioned and not in paragraph 2, because in paragraph 1, the mutiners being already in the vessel cannot seize the vessel by boarding or firing upon the same. So that is the observation of the author. So there is lacking of the statements here. So this should be referring that the word pirates should be put under paragraph 1. Because this act in paragraph 1 pertains to the pirate only. So meaning to say, if you are a mutiner because you're a member of the complement or you are a passenger, if your act is under paragraph 2, technically that would be your defense, because the law punishes only the pirates under the second act of qualified piracy. Do not confuse yourself as well. While the designation of the felony is qualified piracy, but it shall include mutiny as well, because the law says any of the crimes referred to in the preceding article. So while it may be mutiny, it is included in the definition for qualified piracy under Article 123. 6235. While if you are on a vessel, you may be a piracy or a mutineer. So what about if you are on board an airplane? So the law that shall govern is Republic Act 6235. And you have there the most important, or let's say applicable provision that you have to watch out for. You have there section 1 and section 3. It shall be unlawful for any person to compel a change in the course or destination of an aircraft of Philippine registry, or to seize or usurp the control thereof while it is in flight. So what are the things that you need to remember in section 1? The aircraft must be of Philippine registry. What do we mean by Philippine registry? Would it be the nationality of the owner of the aircraft? No. It would be the registration of the aircraft that determines that the same is an aircraft of Philippine registry. When shall there be a violation under Article Republic Act 6235? If you compel a change in the course or destination of an aircraft, or you usurp or seize the control thereof, there is that requirement that the aircraft of Philippine registry must be in flight. So as in the bar, when is an aircraft deemed in flight? An aircraft is in flight from the moment all its external doors are closed following embarkation until any of such doors is open for disembarkation. So I think all of us have boarded a plane already. So when you enter the aircraft, mura ka, as if you are entering through 2 doors. So the first door is the external door the moment it is closed. Even if the aircraft has not taken off or landed on when it is done in its destination, when it reaches its destination, while the same is taxiing from the runway to the boarding area, it is still considered to be in flight until such time that any of these doors are open for disembarkation. Okay, so please take note on the qualification of in-flight if we are talking about aircraft of Philippine registry. Second paragraph of section 1. It shall likewise be unlawful for any person to compel an aircraft of foreign registry. So foreign registry, those aircraft registered outside or not under the Philippine laws, to land in the Philippine territory, or to usurp or seize the control thereof while it is within the said territory. There is no requirement that the same be in flight. For as long as the aircraft of foreign registry is in our territory and you committed any of the acts punished under 6235, then you are liable. Section 3. It shall be unlawful for any person, natural or juridical, to ship, load, or carry in any passenger aircraft operating as a public utility within the Philippines to carry explosive, flammable, corrosive, or poisonous substance or material. That's why if you boarded an aircraft, you can even be denied to board the aircraft if you do not follow the aviation rules. So those are the topics that we need to remember under Title 1. So just please read again your book and please be ready for Title 2 on the next meeting. I think we can cover maybe Titles 2 and 3 on the next meeting. Let's just try, okay? So we can have an early dismissal today, considering that this is our first meeting. So I thank you for your time and see you next week. Good morning.
Thank you,
Thank
Judge.
you, Judge.
Judge.
Thank you,
Judge.
Judge.
Morning, sir.
Thank you, Judge.
Good morning.
Thank you, Judge.